I just had to click on that. Okay. Well, tempted to say we can't go on meeting like this, but looks as though we might have to for a bit longer. More seriously, this is my report on our activities during the last financial year. It seems a while ago now. I mean, it was another successful year, but a very strange one, for reasons that you'll all be familiar with. Coronavirus began here just a couple of weeks before the start of this year. So for the whole of the year we're talking about, all of our staff were home working. We had to seriously change some of the patterns of our befriending. Face-to-face meetings, for instance, between people from different households just weren't possible. So we had to suspend most of that face-to-face activity and replaced it for the most part with telephone contact. Really what I want to talk about, as in past years, although there is a particular exception this year because of the impact of coronavirus, 6 main topics: the impact that coronavirus has had, developments within our services, something about our management structure, something about the board, finances, and looking at our targets against our annual plan. So if we go to coronavirus first, as I've said already, those have been dramatically changed. I mean, staff have all been working from home throughout the year. Face-to-face befriending meetings weren't possible for most of the year, although there was a bit of a relaxation in the late summer, early autumn, and we were able to resume some of the normal activities then. When staff working from home like that obviously has implications and has required a lot of support, a little bit of investment in communications equipment as well. We gave each member of staff their own work mobile phone, for instance. I want to praise the staff for how well they've worked in these different circumstances, and particularly Susan, the manager, for the effort she's gone to make sure that people were supported and that she was aware of how they were doing. We were, as I said, able to resume some activities in the late summer, autumn, and we also introduced some walking groups, which have been a great success, small groups of people meeting outdoors and walking together. One part of our service was particularly affected, I think, by the coronavirus, and that was the memory loss and carers part of what we do. There were huge increases in isolation because so much of daycare and home care was either reduced or suspended altogether. So that carers had an awful lot of extra responsibilities. There also were a number of bereavements, partly because of the higher incidence of death amongst older people due to COVID. That placed huge emotional demands on staff and volunteers, and I do want to praise them for how they did that, how they carried that, and how they worked with it. One development I should mention is that we took the decision during the year to close our part-time office in Nairn. That was partly because in the present circumstances we wouldn't have been able to use it anyway, and also because its rent was due to increase by almost 100% and really raised questions about its cost effectiveness. So we have now withdrawn from that office. Let me turn now to service development. We reached our first anniversary of operating face-to-face services in Easter Ross during the year. That quickly reached all of its targets and made it clear that there was a good demand for our services there. So I see that continuing and going from strength to strength. We recruited an additional part-time volunteer coordinator in the autumn, and that was linked with increase in funding from the community fund and the increases that we had to make in service and provision to go along with that. We were very conscious of the amount of time that was having to be spent on fundraising, and that was really having a huge impact, particularly on the manager, but also on some of the other coordinators. And we took two different steps during the year. We recruited a consultant on a temporary contract to review our fundraising strategy. And later, as a result, we decided to employ a part-time fundraiser for 6 months initially from the beginning of this year. That was will be something that we'll review and consider whether to continue or not beyond that time. We've continued to get very good feedback about the quality and the impact of our services. So it's a great pleasure to be linked with all that we're doing and the impact that clearly is having. At our AGM, we made 15 awards for long service to volunteers, very special volunteers, and these included one for 20 years service and another, a first, for 25 years of service. I mean, the debt we owe those people is just huge. I'd like to say something about management structures. BHL has developed really hugely, and we stuck with the management structure we had almost at the beginning, which was a single manager. The stresses of managing all the different parts of the service and the increased number of people really have become obvious. And it was also clear too that we had a very flat management structure, which didn't allow much scope for progression within the organisation either. And we decided therefore to create 2 new senior coordinator posts. And we advertised interviewed for those shortly before the end of the year. We're talking about people coming into that post. Those posts is something that's only happened during the year since, but you know, it's already clear that that's been a great addition and has brought great advantages to us as an organisation. For similar reasons, we created an additional part-time administrative post. It was increasingly obvious that there was more needed to be done on the admin side that can be done in the hours we had available for administration. Now we turn to the board. The board's membership continued unchanged with 7 members, which was good. A good mixture of people and a good range of skills and backgrounds. We've had to meet by Zoom, as so many organisations during this year, which has its downsides, but has its upsides too, in that you know, reduces travelling time and is perhaps more convenient. That looks likely to be continuing for most of this year too, I think. One of the things that we have done this year is start to think about succession planning. We have some very long-standing members of the board, not least myself, and we do need to be thinking about how this passes on in time to new people. And one of the things that we've been considering is appointing a vice convener, somebody who could succeed me as a convener. I mean, I've been convener for most of the last 30 years, and it's obviously not something I can continue to do indefinitely, and need to think about handing over in a planned way. So that's something we're actively considering, and I'd like to mention, particularly to this AGM, the idea of creating a vice convener post. I think we need to have a bit more thought about just what the functions of that role would be. But one of the intentions will be to prepare somebody for taking over from myself as convener, probably before very much longer. But I say I'm very grateful to all my fellow board members for the time they give to our services and the contributions they make during the year. Let me turn now to finance. As always, we began, well, as always for a very long time, we began the year with considerably less known income than we knew our planned expenditure was. And that has meant that a lot of time has had to be spent on fundraising. Part of that deficit, quite a significant part, related to the fact that our memory loss and carer service lost its funding for a time from NHS Highland. Negotiations over that took a long time, but that funding has been restored, and that had a very good impact on our deficit, our projected deficit. But it does seem to be the case that this is going to be something that's only agreed in the short term, for 1, 2, 3 years at a time, rather than the kind of indefinite funding that we'd expected in the past. So that clearly is going to have implications for us too. But that, I'm not pessimistic about that, but again, it is going to be quite a bit of extra work and a bit of uncertainty about this bidding process each time. NHS Highland leave us in no doubt that the bids for their money always greatly exceed what they have available to offer. On a more positive note about funding, the Scottish Government made available a number of different sources of funds to account for the impact of COVID, both in increasing costs and reducing the opportunities to fundraise elsewhere. And we bid successfully for a share of more than one of those funds. We also, I suppose, put the greatest part of our effort in fundraising into applications to various fund awarding bodies and recorded considerable success with that. So that in the end, we more than covered our deficit and actually entered this year with larger reserves than we'd had the year before. Looking forward to the coming year, the present year, in fact, I mean, we again are projecting a deficit, but not as big as last year's. And, I'm again cautiously optimistic that we will find that. We're very conscious, however, that the major 5-year award we've had from the National Lottery Community Fund comes to an end during the middle of this year. We think there are good possibilities of getting a further award, but it's likely to be for a shorter period and not for as large an amount. So that's something that we're going to have to factor into planning for the future as well. I turn to the last topic. I mean, that's measuring our progress against objectives in our plan. We set out targets for the number of friendships to be maintained in both parts of the service, number of volunteers recruited, the geographical extension of face-to-face befriending. We achieved or exceeded all of those targets, but there was one significant shortfall, and that was that we expressed a wish to a target of reducing our waiting list for people awaiting befriending to less than 20. We did not achieve that. We had 38 friends awaiting a match in March of this year. That was contributed to by several factors. There was an increase in referrals, which is a good thing. There were problems in arranging training for new volunteers because of the COVID restrictions. But the size of that waiting list is a concern and something that we're going to have to take new initiatives with in the coming year, I think. So, coming to sum up, there's a growing demand for the services we offer. There's consistently good feedback about the impact and the quality of our services. Both parts of the service continue to develop and expand, and we continue to see the success of the recovery model for improving the measurability of outcomes and the targeting of purposes in what we do. Funding environment continues to be challenging, but we have responded to that by the changes in how we do that, and recruiting a fundraiser. But this is likely to be a feature of how we have to work for the foreseeable future, I think. But having said that, the organisation's in good heart. We've got a good staff. We're providing excellent services, I think, and I'm sure that will continue. I'd like to thank all our funders for their generosity in making what we do possible. I give special thanks to some of the individuals who have raised money through different ways, sponsored efforts of one sort or another, simply gifts. We are very grateful to them, as always. I would just finish by saying, it continues to be a great pleasure to be part of such a fine service, really making such an impact on so many people's lives. And I thank everybody that makes that possible. Thank you all.